of adventure today. Next to the story of Jesus and telling stories about my children and my new 1-year-old grandson, whose birthday we celebrate tonight, his 1-year birthday when I get home, it's my favorite story. And it's a story that I hope captures your heart. I hope it plays with your imagination. I hope it stirs you on the inside to follow God, maybe at a greater level than you ever have. I hope it reveals to you things about God's character and how God does stuff, because he wants us to understand that. This is a story I learned when I was 18 years of age. And I want to start, though, by showing this scripture to you. Isaiah 42:12 says this: "Let them give glory to the Lord and proclaim his praise in the islands." And this story that I want to tell you today, what did they do? Oh, we're good. When I was 18 years of age, I left Minnesota, where I had grown up a part of my life, graduated from high school, and I went out to join Youth with a Mission. It's the largest missions organization in the world, and their main missions hub is there in Kona, Hawaii. And it's actually where I met Lisa, her mom and dad. Lisa was a teenager, and her mom and dad came over to Hawaii to go through some schooling, and so she was in my youth group, so I have stories. While I was there, I encountered this guy. Let me throw his picture up here. And so let me have you pronounce this with me. Opukaha'ia. Opukaha'ia. That means in Hawaiian, split stomach. And they gave him this name. He was born in 1792. And they gave him this name because either, and nobody knows for sure, but either it was a chiefess, some royal lady who died during a C-section, or he may have been born from a C-section, but they often named, their children based on something that had happened there in their lives. And so Opukaha'ia, split stomach. And so he was born on the south tip of the Big Island. If I show you the second slide here, you'll see where the little red mark X is there. That's where he was born. And so 1792 is Kentucky became a state. The French Revolution was rocking. George Washington was beginning to serve his second term. So it's that time frame. And so Opukaha'ia is born here near Naalehu, here on the Big Island of Hawaii. And if you've ever been to Hawaii, you're aware of some of the other islands. If you're not, you'll see up in the upper right-hand corner kind of how that fits in there. And it's actually the island of Hawaii, but they refer to it affectionately as the Big Island because all the other islands could fit into that one. It's 92 miles by 76 miles. So we're talking not a big space here. But God wanted to declare his glory in the islands. And so Opukaha'ia is born, and he's born into a time in Hawaii that at this point for about 500 years, they'd been ruled under something called the kapu system, K-A-P-U. You still see signs there today that says kapu, which kind of is like taboo. Don't go in there, don't touch it. But the kapu system, there was a piece of wisdom for it, of protecting the land and the sea and that kind of thing. But there was also a side of it that was not godly. And that side that was not godly was, we would call it a bit superstitious and that kind of thing. But for them, it was very real. For example, let's say the sun was shining here and I just happened to be strolling by, and where Walter is sitting, Walter is the ali'i, the Hawaiian word for king. And he is the ali'i. And as I just happen to stroll by here and the sun shines on me and my shadow lands on Walter, I am immediately taken to a heiau, something that, and again, they're different sizes, but maybe half the football field size to a full football field size. That's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 feet or taller or higher, all made of lava rock, and I would be sacrificed. If fingernails, finger clippings, hair clippings of the ali'i, I was even near them, I would be sacrificed. There were things like that. For example, men and women, another part of the kapu system, they could not eat together. That was a no-no. And there were certain things that men could not eat and women could not eat. One of them, for example, for a woman was a banana. She was not allowed to eat a banana. One of the chiefesses really desired to try a banana, so she got her servant to sneak and get a banana, and he was caught. Her life was spared because she was a chiefess, but he was sacrificed. And so there were these heiaus, and it was this was the system. So as you can imagine, great fear, great control, and yet there was some wisdom pieces to it of protecting, pieces I'm not talking about today, with land and sea and that kind of thing. So this is the environment he's growing up in. Kamehameha, King Kamehameha, began to consolidate the Hawaiian Islands, Kauai and Oahu and Maui, and now he was adding the Big Island here into the mix of this. And down here on the southern part of the island, if we put that map up again, on the southern part of the map where he was growing up, they begin to, say, okay, this part of the island we need to begin to go after. And so they came into the village where Opukaha'ia and his family were living. And Opukaha'ia, in the middle of the battle, saw his mom and dad kind of sliced and diced, and right in front of him. He took his little brother, he's about 10 years of age now at the time, he took his little brother and he kind of headed for the hills, and a warrior's spear landed in the back of his little brother and killed him. But Opukaha'ia's life was spared. And so he went from where that little red X is up to the top there in the Kohala area where the orange one is for the next 2 years, and he was being raised by the family of the man who had killed his family. Imagine that. You are now an orphan, and it's not bad enough that you're an orphan. You're being raised by the man and his family who killed your family. During this time, he meets one of his uncles, who is a kahuna down in Kealakekua, where I have the blue X there, Kealakekua Bay. Now, we sometimes kid around, hey, you're the big kahuna, but the kahuna was kind of a person who had spiritual authority. They had mana. That's the Hawaiian word, mana. And that's why sometimes these people were killed. Like if the shadow happened to land on the king from me with the sun, the reason I was killed was not just a random thing. They believed that I just sucked the mana out of the king. And the only way it was restored is for my life, my breath, to be taken from me so it would be restored to the king. All right? And so here the kahuna's role in all of this is the sacrificing, the human sacrifice. And there was different roles they would play, but for some this was one of the roles. Where Opukaha'ia goes back and is raised now by his uncle, who is that human sacrificing priest there in Kealakekua. And the Hikiau Heiau is still there today, where young Opukaha'ia was being trained, discipled, if you were, to become the next human sacrificing priest. That's where he is. That's what's going on in this young man's life. Until one day, there in Kealakekua Bay, from New England, a ship, the Triumph, comes rolling into Kealakekua Bay. And like most young teenagers, Opukaha'ia swims out and is curious, and they bring him on board. And when he gets on board, he meets another young man by the name of Hopu. And Hopu was another young Hawaiian boy. They didn't speak any English, and so, there was gesturing and grunting and groaning and trying to figure out what each other was saying, but they had him stay on board for dinner. And he was a very likable young man, and they invited him to go with them. Well, he went back and tells his kahuna uncle about this, and he says, ixnay on that idea. We're not doing that. And it's funny to read because there was a couple of times where he's in his grass hut and Opukaha'ia, kind of digs out of there and goes back out, and the uncle has to bring him back in. And finally, there's an exchange made, and they're asking the uncle, what would it take for him to come? And they said, if you give me a hog so I can sacrifice it to my gods, I will let him go. So in exchange for a hog, Opukaha'ia is allowed to go. Now think of the risk of this. He'd never been off this island before. It's the only thing he's ever known in his life. He hardly knows these people on this ship, but you can tell he's trying to rid himself of some of the difficulties of his past and to begin something new. He's now maybe 13, 14, 15 years of age. And he boards this ship, and this captain of this ship, Britnell, his whole profession was he would go to the Seal Islands and they would capture the seals, take their skins, and then they would sail to China. And so Opukaha'ia experienced this. They'd sail to China where they would sell the skins in exchange for China, dishes, plates. He'd bring that back in huge quantities back to New England and sell them, and that's how he made a living. And so Opukaha'ia, gets to go with him. Well, on this journey, Opukaha'ia begins to meet different people. And he doesn't know how to speak the language. He's just serving on board the ship, doing what they ask him to do. But he's beginning to experience the world. Well, they come back through Hawaii. They ask if him and Hopu would like to now stay, and they both say no, and so they go on, and they end up in New England. They go down around South America and come back up, and they end up in New England. Well, on this ship, there's this man I want to introduce you to, Russell Hubbard. If you put his little profile up here, Russell Hubbard, this is the only picture that we have in history of this man. And Russell Hubbard was a Yale College, it was known as Yale College at the time. He was a Yale College grad, and before he did his post-grad work, he just wanted to go on an adventure. So he jumped on the Triumph and sailed seven seas, so to speak. And this is one of the guys Opukaha'ia meets. And he begins to teach Opukaha'ia, who they named on board the ship Henry, because they couldn't say his name. Oh, let's think of it, Henry, all right? And so they begin to pour into young Opukaha'ia, Henry, and he starts teaching him English by using the Bible. And it's his first introduction to anything of what he had known of idolatry and human sacrificing and the Kapu system. And through the scriptures, he's teaching this boy the alphabet. He's teaching him English. And so by the time that Opukaha'ia ends up in New England, there's a little bit of a foundation there. The captain invites him and Hopu to live in his home for a time, which he does. Kind of wanders the town and becomes a servant and works and starts taking care of himself. And one day, a man by the name of Edwin Dwight runs into him on the steps of Yale College. And here's a little drawing of that. And Opukaha'ia is in tears. He's crying. And this Yale grad who's starting his postgraduate work says, "Young man, why are you weeping?" And he says in his broken English, "I have no one to teach me." So this man, a follower of Jesus, takes him in and begins to teach him, again, building on what Hubbard had done on the Triumph, alphabet and English. And they're all shocked because there had been this thought that these islanders are savages. They're just savages. They can't be converted. They can't learn. And they're watching this young man begin to take things in and to begin to learn. And they're shocked. They're amazed. And not only does Opukaha'ia eventually learn English, so now there's this Hawaiian-based English, but Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. And this man begins to pour into his life. Well, one day, in this man's room, Dwight's room, his little kind of room where they were meeting, another man walked in, a man by the name of Samuel Mills. Samuel Mills is known in history for the haystack prayer movement. What happened was him and several others had begun to pray for the United States to begin to send missionaries. At this time, there had not been a missions team sent from our nation. You know, we're used to like short-term mission trips. Your team's coming back from Haiti, and it had not been done in our nation at this point in time. Until 1812, and Mills was a part of that. We sent a team to India. Well, Mills shows up in Edwin Dwight's room when Opukaha'ia is there. And he's had a burden for the nations, and he looks at this different colored skinned young man, and Dwight introduces them, and they begin to build a relationship. Now, Opukaha'ia hasn't given his life to Jesus at this point, but he's being taught and influenced and loved well, and he's watching people pray, and he's realizing how different this is from where he had grown up. So now he's maybe 17, 18 years of age. Mills invites him to come and live in his mom and dad's home. His dad's a pastor, big jovial, sense of humor, word of God kind of guy, and he lives in the home, and it becomes his ohana. Ohana is the Hawaiian word for family. And this becomes kind of his ohana. He's adopted into this family. They love him well. He begins to see them praying with one another. And it's during somewhere in this time that he gives his life to Jesus. And Mills then begins to encourage him, the son, what if we bring the gospel to your countrymen? And it sows a seed in his life. Well, there's another man I want you to meet too, Timothy Dwight. Same last name, but he's the second cousin of Edwin Dwight, and he's the president of Yale College. He's a key player in the whole move of God that happened in New England. Matter of fact, he was married to Jonathan Edwards' granddaughter. And that's his wife. And so he's just tied into this whole move of God. And this guy begins to pour the things of Jesus into Opukaha'ia. And his life just begins to change. And they begin to take him to churches. And instead of them saying, we need to bring the gospel to the nations, they let a Hawaiian boy, young man now, begin to declare the things of his people. And when you read some of the things in Opukaha'ie's memoirs, it's remarkable what happens because he's up in the middle of the night, crying, tears, asking God to save his countrymen. And he uses language like this. They know of no Jesus. They know of no heaven. They know of no hell. They only know of wood idols and stone idols. And he's crying, God, save my countrymen. And the people that were around him said his daily prayer ritual would be during the day and at night, crying out that God would redeem his people. Well, in the middle of all this, they take him kind of on the circuit, and missions funding for the first time in our nation. Now, a missions team had just gone out about 2-3 years before this, 1812. And missions money starts coming in, and they're going, oh my gosh, this guy, when he speaks, people are connecting and they're giving. And so this man, Mills, and others start the Foreign School of Missions. It's the first foreign mission school in our nation's history. It's discipleship meets going to the nations. And in it were Hawaiian young people, Islanders, and Cherokee Indians, because they were sending people into the tribes to begin to bring the gospel as well. So it was the first foreign mission school, and they began to pour into people. Everybody's excited. Mills and Opukaha'ia are going to go back and lead the team to what was known at the time as the Sandwich Islands. Captain Cook had, in his kind of discovery of them in I think it's 1779, named it the Sandwich Islands after Earl of Sandwich. And so the locals called it Hawaii, they called it the Sandwich Islands. So Mills and Opukaha'ia are going to go back. Well, they start the foreign mission school. He's the prize student, Opukaha'ia. And everybody's excited about this young man. They're investing in him. And as he begins to learn the language, he translates the book of Genesis into Hawaiian. He's not only the first Hawaiian Christian, but he's the first one to take the sounds of their language and put it in written form in an alphabet in a way that they could begin to read. And this comes into play later as the missionaries go. So they're all set, everybody's ready to go, except one little thing. Opukaha'ia, 26 years of age, in the foreign mission school, gets typhus fever. And for several weeks, it's looking like he's going to recover, and then suddenly he takes a turn for the worst, and he dies. And on his deathbed, he draws his Hawaiian friends, and he speaks in their native language to them about, you need to continue this. And he talked to the people who were about him and had them pray for him, and they were asking what he was seeing and experiencing. And it's interesting because when he died with a smile on his face, because they said he was seeing heaven, and literally there was a smile on his face as he went into heaven. But folks, people were shocked because he had almost become like this foreign celebrity, now hometown guy's done good. They were shocked. Edwin Dwight begins to compile the letters that he had written and the things from his journals into what was published. It was called the Memoirs of Henry Obukaha'ia. And they published this thing. I have a picture of it here I want to show you. And it's this journal memoir thing, and it became a bestseller of its time. It was like someone has said to me, it was like the Pilgrim's Progress of its time. And they had about 50,000 copies printed over about a 40-year period of time. And people begin to read it. And they begin to be spoken to about it. And they begin to say, we need to go finish the task this young man was beginning. And they joined, some of them the foreign mission school. Others had gone through theological training. And here's another interesting event. So February of 1818 is when Opukaha'ia goes into heaven. In May, while Mills is coming home from Africa, exploring new lands there and dealing with slavery issues and all kinds of things, he dies at sea months later. And so the two pioneers who are going to bring the gospel to the Hawaiian Islands, they're both gone. And as this book begins to circulate, it becomes the mission mobilizer. And a year and a half later, in October of 1819, 17 people, adults, and 5 children. One family, the Chamberlains, had 5 kids. The oldest was about 13, 14. The youngest was ready to turn 1 year of age. And they decided they would go for him. It was an amazing thing that began to happen. And God began to move, and people began to sell stuff and property, and it wasn't being received well by the parents. The parents would use the same excuses we hear today. Why do you need to go so far away when the need is great right here? And these people were feeling a tremendous burden to go. Men would go to some of the owners of ships who would sail in and out of Hawaii, and they said to them, we will pay for the passage back for any woman who's on board the ship, who's in Hawaii, who wants to get out of there. We will pay their way back. They were so concerned about what would happen amongst the savages in the islands to these women. You had this one family, the Chamberlains. You had several of the Hawaiian boys who'd gone through the school, and they were going back. You know what the rest of the crew was made up of? It was made up of a half a dozen couples, all who were singles weeks and months before, but all felt called, and they looked at each other and said, you know, I'm really kind of drawn to you. I feel called to go on this missions trip. I'm not kidding you. That's literally what happened. And so all these singles got married. And so they had a 164-day, 18,000-mile cruise to Hawaii. And when you read the story, it is a remarkable thing, the sacrifice that went on there. Because here's how I want you, think of being a parent of one of these young people, how proud you would be of that they're willing to lay down their lives. The average age was 26, which was Opukaha'ia's age. You had 17 and 18-year-olds who, like they were the stars of their universities, and they left to go. I mean, you read it, and it's an amazing thing what happened. But I want you to catch and feel this with me. All they knew was King Kamehameha, the kapu system, the human sacrificing, the idol worship. This is what they knew, that we didn't have Fox and CNN and internet and texting. We didn't have that stuff. And so that's all they knew, because that's what Opukaha'ia and Hopu and others had told them about. That's where they knew they were going to bring the gospel. So it would be like this. It'd be like if Bill and Lisa and the leadership team and the staff had been fasting and praying, say, since the first of the year, and Bill just gets up here today and says, hey guys, you haven't known this, but the staff, the elders, we've been fasting, praying for months and talking, and we feel like God's asked us as a congregation to send a specific missions team to ISIS. Who would be willing to pray with us about going? That's what it would have felt like. I don't want you to get into some romantic thing of, wow, the missionaries, and look what you need to understand and feel what they felt and what the parents felt, because they knew exactly what they were going into. They knew they could be the next human sacrifice. So this is the story, friends. It's a remarkable thing, okay? Opukaha'ia, he was buried. I just want to show you this so you can see this. He was buried here in Cornwall. And again, his funeral became his heaven-going kind of a launching pad for, what it was that the Lord wanted to do. Let me show you the next slide. This was what was on his gravesite. And it talks about this pagan priest in training coming over and how God met him and encountered him. And look at the very end. It says, he died without fear, with a heavenly smile on his countenance and glory in his soul. Let's go to the next slide. And so here's the Thaddeus, the brig Thaddeus. This is the ship that they board the missionaries now to go over. It's maybe 80 some feet long. Again, let me say this, 164 days, 18,000 miles. All the way down South America. There was no Panama Canal, and they had to go all the way then to the Pacific and into Hawaii. You can read this online. If you type in Thaddeus Journal, they have this online, the journal, and you can tell the relationships that were developing. You can tell the seeking of the Lord every day in prayer. You can tell the dangers, like Hopu one day fell off the ship. He was cleaning the side of the ship, and a wave hit, and he falls off, and it took them about an hour. And he had to literally, as a Hawaiian young man, he knew, I need to get these clothes off, because they were going to take him down and make him heavy. And so he's just sitting there in the water. He had to sit there for an hour. And then they said when they brought him back onto the ship, they looked down and there was a shark. And God just had his hand on this missionary crew to bring them 164 days, 18,000 miles. Amazing. Okay, now let me just put a comma there. Okay, and let me go back to Hawaii and begin to tie some of this together for you. So what's happening in Hawaii during this time? You see, we have a God that when we obey what he asks us to do, he orchestrates things in an incredible way. Sometimes we don't see God moving. Can I just be really honest with you? I don't mean to be harsh, but we don't see God moving because we're not obeying. That's why. Well, I want to see God do stuff. Well, then start obeying. He asks you to step out. Are you stepping out? Well, these guys were obeying. They were in it. One of the guys that asked Opukaha'ia before he died, he said, why do you want to bring the gospel to your countrymen? And he shared with them because they don't know Jesus. He said, what if they don't receive your gospel and they kill you? He said, I'm ready for that. And obviously these missionaries had already counted the cost. But what was God up to in Hawaii? So obviously because they didn't have the latest news on television of what was going on there, they weren't aware of this. But I want to kind of let you in on it before they get there so you can celebrate with what it is God did. So February, Opukaha'ia goes on to heaven. May, a year later, Kamehameha dies. And that started changing everything. The two queens and Liho, the son, they get together and they decide, let's eat together and see what happens. They eat, nothing happens, and the whole Kapu system goes kaput. Heva, who was the kahuna, he was literally the big kahuna. He was a relative of the original kahuna that came over from Tahiti. So there was great mana in this man. When this all happened, he said, and I'm not quoting directly, but I'm quoting accurately. He said, I always thought there was something off here with our gods. How God does this, I don't know, but he used this man who was open to say and prophesy that our next religion will come in a black box. It will come in a language we do not know. And so God begins to dismantle. The heiaus, or human sacrifices, are beginning to be torn down. They're beginning to be burned. This is all going on. Like the eating thing happened 2 weeks, give or take a few days, before they got on the boat. I mean, God's preparing a place. Do you know that when you obey God, he goes ahead of you? That's why, again, sometimes we never see God going ahead because we're not willing to get in the boat and obey what he's asking us to do. And here God's going, come on, keep coming. I'm answering the prayers of a servant of mine, Opukaha'ia, who prayed in the middle of the night, night after night after night. God is answering his prayers and he's making a way. Is that not remarkable? Let me show you another slide here. So the X marks the spot there, Kailua Kona. It's where Lisa and I met, the bay right there. This is where they come in. But before they do, you see up on the top there, it says Hawi, Hawi. They rounded the corner up there on about day 160. Okay? And they come up and where it says Kauai Bay, kind of right above, in the 11 o'clock kind of section there. They come into Kauai Bay. And as they come in there is a heiau that is still there today. It is massive. It is huge. And so they're coming around the corner and they're seeing that. That's one of the first things that they would have seen. This is a heiau that was built, that Kamehameha, the way he dedicated is he brought kind of his chief rival, kind of baited him into battle, and they captured him and they sacrificed him to the gods to offer this heiau to the gods. And this is what they see. And they come around that corner, and remember, they're praying, they're obeying, but all they know is idolatry, kapu system, human sacrificing. And they come around the tip of the big island, come into near Kauai Bay. They take Hopu as the translator and several, the first mate and several others, and they go to shore. And they said in the Thaddeus Journal, it's like that 3 hours was the longest 3 hours of their lives because they didn't know what was going to happen. They were going to ask Kamehameha for permission. They needed to find where he was and ask for permission that they could come on, onto the island. So you can imagine when they are coming back after 3 hours, they get to the boat and it says that Hopu was so excited because he had just learned what I've told you had happened. He could only speak in Hawaiian. They're like, Thomas, settle down. Finally, the first mate goes, look, here's what he's trying to say. Kamehameha is dead, the heiaus have been burned, and God has made a way. And several days later, they come around the other side here to Kona. And this, you can go ahead and turn that. Thank you. And so this is the bay where they land. All right, this is what it looks like today. If you and I were to go there today, this is what it looks like. And you see the little red arrow right there, just off the, it's too bad that the pier is there now in this place. But the rocks that are right there, if we can go to the next slide, they just placed this up for the 195th anniversary in April of the missionaries. But there's those lava rocks right over here. This is known as the Plymouth Rock of Hawaii. And this is where the missionaries first stepped. And as they came on shore, they were carrying a black box that had a Bible in it that was from another language. And when Heva saw this, kind of the spiritual leader with all the mana declares some things that begins to open the kings, the eli'i, and the queens to the gospel. God had prepared a way. It's an amazing thing. Let me show you the next slide. Several years later, Opukaha'ia Church, this is the first Christian church in Hawaii. It's right there, literally a stone's throw, and they call it the Stones Church. But I want to show you something. You see it's white and black speckled. Well, the white is coral, and the black, some of the black lava that's in there was leftovers from the heiaus that were torn down. And in the name of Jesus, they were going to redeem and tell the story of what God did right in the building. Opukaha'ia Church, it's still a functioning church. I spoke there in February of this year. And it was the base of what God was beginning to do in the islands. And he began to move in a mighty way. Not only was the gospel brought, but you need to also know education was brought to the people for the first time. Healthcare for the first time. And on we go. And God began to bless the work of the mission. Did they do it all right? No. And I'll make a point to say something about that here in a little bit. But God began to do an incredible work among the people of Hawaii. Let's go to the next slide. This is what you see in the arch for, I think it was the 150th or the 100th anniversary of the missionaries. They created an arch in front of the church, and this is on it. The first Hawaiian Christian, Henry Opukaha'ia, died at Cornwall, Connecticut, 1818. The first Christian missionaries to Hawaii, Bingham, Thurston, and Whitney, landed at Kailua, April 1820, with their Hawaiian comrades. Here's the three that were on with them, Hopu, Kanui, and Honolii. And so this marks that spot. It marks that place in history. Next slide. So God begins to move on the island, and people begin to follow Jesus. And the missionaries' work is beginning to be fruitful, and the elite are responding to God, except for a few. And those few kings that are not responding, one of the chiefesses, Kapiolani, begins to say, I want to see something done with this. She had found Jesus, was convinced of who he was convinced that he was the savior of this people, and so began to determine, how can I show this? And she was a bold, courageous, large Hawaiian woman. And she decided she was going to do something that would get their attention. So she walked from Kona, on the left there, down to where you see the X, which today is known as the Hawaii Volcano National Park. It's where Kilauea volcano that's been erupting, that you have seen on the news kind of crowding into towns. It's that same volcano. And so she decides she's going to walk and challenge the volcano goddess, who is a false god but is believed in still to this day. And so I want to show you this artwork that someone did of this story, because she was told, if you go there, she will lick you up and burn you. And all the kahunas that were still trying to keep the old religion, no, you can't do this. And she went and ate berries that were only supposed to be sacrificed. She was very bold, but she believed what God could do. And so she walked to the mouth of the volcano, and they said, what happens if you do not survive? She said, if I don't survive, then you need to worship her. But if I do, you need to give your heart to Jesus. You need to follow Jehovah. And so she stood with an open Bible and declared over this bubbling, boiling brew of lava, Jehovah is my God. And declared things, and nothing happened. And it broke the Kapu system wide open. She wasn't PC. She was obedient and she was courageous. And you and I have to realize God uses people that only answer to him. And I'm not talking about not being submitted to authority. Of course we do that. Don't mishear me. But a heart inside that ultimately knows, I have to give an account to him. And Chiefess Kapiolani knew that that's who she had to give an account to. And this story, which was by the kind of the most famous Hawaiian painter, has been painted and is shown in different places, is a story of this chiefess's courage. Let's show you the next slide. So God continues to move, and over the next 40 years, by the end of the 1850s, like 1858-ish in there, somewhere between 80 and 90% of the Hawaiian Islands, which by the way at this point in time are a nation, is Christian. A man by the name of Titus Cohen came to Hilo, which is on the opposite side here, the Big Island, and he was the pastor of this church, Haile Church, which is still there today. Because of the move of God, Haile Church kept growing and growing and growing, and even though Hilo was only the size of 1,000 people, the church became the largest church, not only in the islands, but in the world at that time. It was the single largest church in the world with 10,000 members. One day is recorded where Cohen baptized 1,705 people on one day. Guys, can I just say something? 92 miles by 76 miles. That's the size of this island. God is displaying his glory and his praise in the islands. And he is moving like crazy. All right, now, next slide. It began to affect the leaders, Kamehameha's sons and grandson. And at this time, it's his grandson who's in charge, and he's been impacted by this. And so they want to lay it as part of their constitution. And so you will see this is the state symbol today in Hawaii. And if you look with me on the left there, kind of going across, it says, Uamau ke'ea oka'aina ikapono. And in Hawaiian, it means this. This is still the state motto today, based on the move of God. The life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. That was the motto, and that came from the king at the time in the 1850s. And it's still the motto. If you watch Hawaii Five-0 on television, you'll see this logo on the floor. It's still the motto there today. And God began to move, and God began to change lives. Now let me show you one other thing here before I jump into what's happened. This date that you see up here is known by Hawaiian people, and it's a very sad date to them. And this is, you might remember on that plaque, one of the names was Thurston. This is, I believe, a grandson. And there were so many lessons to be learned because mistakes were made. And there are Hawaiian people, precious Hawaiian people today who are still very bitter towards missionaries. It's because the second and third generation of the missionaries began to buy up land. See, to a Hawaiian, the word for land, and you saw it on that last slide, is aina. Aina. And land means not only the land, but it means the sky and the ocean as well. The aina. It's kind of a holistic picture of it. And the aina is like another family member to Hawaiian people, to tend the land. And so when white people begin to buy up the land out of greed, it began to change the hearts of the people. And one of the things that happened, and why this date is significant, it was the last day that a queen, Liliuokalani, was ruling over the Hawaiian Islands, and the United States came in with a coup and unlawfully took over the Hawaiian Islands. It's something that Bill Clinton, during his presidency, wrote a letter of apology for, paid reparations for what was done, some 100 years earlier. And this was a bad day in the church because Liliuokalani and others were a part of the churches that were there. And unfortunately, some of the spiritual leaders, being members of the United States, chose wrongly. And there was a leaving of the church because it was like, how can we trust these people? We've trusted, we've walked with them, we've shared the Lord with them, We've fellowshiped with them. And now the Hawaiian people, many of them could not trust. And so it was a bad day in the story of Christian history. And there were lessons to be learned, and there's lessons to be had that we can glean from this to move forward. But God, in his grace and his mercy, continued to move. And God was doing things in the islands. Now, I want to get you a little current, all right? So let me show you this next picture. So, again, back to the X there in Kona. Today, if you were to go there today, you will find a place there called the University of the Nations. It's the Youth with a Mission missionary base that is also now a university. This is where Lisa and I met when her and her family, the Hermans, came over and went to a school, and Lisa was in my youth group during that time. It's at this very spot. Let me show you the next picture here. So the bottom X here is that very spot. You can see the bay and the pier at the top up there, kind of again around 11 o'clock-ish. 10 o'clock, you can see the pier. That's where the ship came in. Well, where the X is on the bottom here, this is where this camp is. And I want you to catch this. This is the single largest missionary base in the world. It's not an accident that God sticks it on the same 92 by 76 mile island that Opukaha'ia came from and prayed for. God still is doing a work in that same place. Would it not be awesome to know that if Jesus doesn't come back in our lifetime, that you are still impacting the world when you're in heaven? Because of his prayers, because of his obedience, his life still impacts others to this very day. And you see that other X right there? That X is something that just happened in the last 2 years. The YWAM's ships ministry. The ships. Remember, the Thaddeus came in right there. The ships ministry literally has a property there now where they're training people to go on ships to the islands. You could stand and throw a baseball with an easy throw from where that little training base is now to the water where the Thaddeus came in. God's going, I'm messing with you here to make a point. I'm showing you that your faithfulness in prayer, your faithfulness in obedience allows me to continue to move nearly 200 years afterwards. This is the God that we serve. This is your God. This is the one that can say, United States of America can be changed. But it's not going to change if we just sit passively by and it's going to mean you and I have to pray. It means if God's called you to this church, guys, this is your ohana. You have your personal ohana, but you have your Christian ohana, your family. This is where I say, Jesus, how can I link arms with others? How can we serve? How can we make a difference? You might not be called to go to ISIS, the same feeling that these missionaries had from New England to these dangerous islands as they looked at the time. But doggone it, where you serve, are you being Jesus? Are you bringing the life of Jesus to people? It's my friend Winky Pratt, and he says, you know, you're either a missionary or a mission field. Which are you? Something to think about. Let me show you this next slide. So this is on the campus of the University of the Nations, right? They have the flags up representing the nations that are on campus at any time. And so people come from actually the islands and around the world and are trained. And then some of them go back to their own places, just like Opukaha'ia wanted to do. And some of them go to other nations out of obedience to Jesus. Amazing thing. Now, let me just tell you this. I'm bringing this in for a landing. So in August of 2013, Cheryl and I took 6 weeks. This is where we met, got married. Our son Ryan was born there. Malia got the Hawaiian name. So it's a place of great affection for us, for this story and experiences in our lives. So we took 6 weeks off. We had been saving for it and just thought, you know, let's just take a little kind of mini sabbatical and get away and rest and be restored so we can keep giving out. So we went there and spent about half our time there, a week on Maui, a week on Oahu, and 4 weeks, I guess, in Kona. Well, while I was there, the pastor of Opukaha'ia, the first Christian church, he's a friend of mine, and we're having breakfast, and he says, hey, Dave, you need to come to the Opukaha'ia thing on Saturday. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you know, they're doing the 20-year anniversary thing. And I'm looking at him like, David, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, you don't know. And so here's the story he tells me. So Opukaha'ia, in his memoirs, on the day he died, moments before he died, one of the things he said was this, oh, how I long to see Hawaii, but I think I never will. The Lord knows what's best. And one of his relatives felt in the middle of the night one night that the Holy Spirit spoke to her and said, I want you to bring his bones. Iwi is the Hawaiian word. I want them to be brought back to Hawaii as a testimony to the young people of this man's life. So they began to walk through the process of that. And so I had the privilege, Cheryl and I, one of the only haoles there in this Hawaiian crowd. Lauren was there, the founder of Youth of the Mission, and I sat behind him and I took this picture. Lauren is currently the founder of Youth of the Mission. He's now 80 years old, just turned 80. There's a picture of Opukaha'ia that we started with, and I'm sitting right behind him, and I took this picture because God's showing me, here I am moving back then, here I am moving now. I'm a God of then and now, now and then. And your life does not just count for now. See, we live in a world with ATMs and texting and everything's fast and now and immediate. It still doesn't change that we're supposed to live our life both for now and then. The choices that we make every day count not only for now, but for then. Do you live your life that way with a long view? Is that part of who you are? Let me show you this next picture. So this is where Opukaha'ia, his Iwi, his bones are right now. You see the blue behind there? That's Kealakekua Bay. That's where he swam out. As that little young man, he swam out. And this is where they have now buried him as a testimony to the Hawaiian people of what God did through this life. An amazing story. It's amazing what God can do. Now, there's tons of takeaways, but I gave us 5 this morning that I just want you to think about. First, God pours himself through those willing to give themselves fully to him. Are you today willing to give yourself fully to him? All abandoned. I mean, we can sing the songs about being abandoned, but God, I might not have the courage to do what those missionaries did. I might not have taken the risk Opukaha'ia did of getting on some boat and when I only knew that, but I'm willing. Secondly, disciple making is important. It's a key to transforming people and nations. I told you the story of 4 of the 7 men that invested in his life. You never know. I mean, just being real honest with you, I remember when the Discipleship Journey Manual came out. It's a discipleship manual that I wrote, and Lisa called me. Here's little Lisa Schuler, who was Lisa Herman, who was in my youth group, who was wonderful young lady and a little rascal at the same time. And she calls me and she says, hey, can I get some of those discipleship manuals? I said, sure. And I, out of curiosity, I said, hey, what are you using them for? Because they were just fresh. I was curious where people, she said, well, I'm discipling the women in the White House. I had no idea that little Lisa Herman would one day, when she was that 14-year-old running around in my youth group, be a person that God would open a door that she could begin to pour into women in the White House. You don't know who it is you're investing in and what doors God may open for them. And these 4 men whose names I gave you who invested, they had no idea what God would do through Opukaha'ia then nor now. I can only imagine they're looking over the balcony of heaven going, probably still calling him a Henry. Henry, look what God's doing on your island. He's going, oh, I prayed for that. Living life with a long view, friends. God orchestrates, we obey. He orchestrated the whole thing in Hawaii exactly at the timing that the missionaries landed, that they would be open. Trust God in your family, in your area of society where you're serving, or what God's doing through this church that you're a part of, that as you obey, God will open up a way. It's just who he is. It's how he works. Our choices today can glorify Jesus and advance his kingdom beyond our lifetimes. Get that. And this last one, he's the same God today. So just do Opukaha'ia. Pray. God, pray for people. And then begin to obey what the Lord shows you to do. Amen.